because I've never been afraid to fail because I'm so good at failing. Failing can be one of the most exciting and wonderful things that a person can do, if you learn from it, if you enjoy it, and if you're not afraid of it. Fear of failing is what causes most people to not try. If you're not afraid of failing, then you're not afraid to try, and if you're not afraid to try, you're going to succeed sometimes. And when you succeed, you're going to probably succeed at something that other people were afraid to try.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming out.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
It's so fun to see it. I mean, it's so absolutely amazingly, mind-bogglingly different than the last time I was here.
Yeah, it's crazy. Had I built this building yet?
No.
We were still over there.
Yeah, we're still over there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how, that's been about 14 months since we moved in here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I was thinking, as I was driving up here, I was thinking back to all the hammer-ins and all of the people that you introduced me to that I would never have known if it hadn't been for you.
It's kind of, that was actually something I wanted to do again this summer, but there was a couple event conflicts this summer, but next summer for sure I want to do another hammer-in, especially before we move out of this building. Mm-hmm. But now we're set up pretty well between this and over there to have a cool event.
Yeah, it'd be really cool.
It would be fun to get a lot of those guys that you're talking about. I haven't seen in years.
Well, few are not here anymore.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So, no, I wanted to have you on because for people that don't know, you're right here locally. I mean, your store is what, 8 or 9 miles from here, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you've always been one of the most interesting people that I've ever known.
That can be interpreted in a number of different ways. I chose in life to take everything as a compliment unless it absolutely cannot be taken as one. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's just been, over the years, it's been cool. You've been inspiring because it seems like you're always inquisitive and always looking, like you're not afraid to take on a challenge or a task, or if you don't know how to do something, you're like, well, I'll just figure it out or I'll just do it.
Well, because I've never been afraid to fail because I'm so good at failing. No, I am, really. I mean, failing can be...
right there tight, that mic.
Sorry. Failing can be one of the most exciting and wonderful things that a person can do, if you learn from it, if you enjoy it, and if you're not afraid of it.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, fear of failing is what causes most people to not try. And if you're not afraid of failing, then you're not afraid to try. And if you're not afraid to try, you're going to succeed sometimes. And when you succeed, you're going to probably succeed at something that other people were afraid to try.
Yeah.
So it really is, a long time ago when we had to adopt our second and third kid, I had to do a home study. And in that home study, they asked me, what's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness? And I thought about it quite a bit. And I answered the same thing. I think I can do anything.
Yeah.
I think I could do anything. Almost everything on earth was done and created. I mean, in terms of things we make and do by humans. And I'm a human, so why can't I do whatever any other human has done?
Right.
It's just a matter of time and figuring it out.
Right.
So,
yeah,
but that's also weakness because I try to do things I probably shouldn't do, according to my wife.
Right. What's that noise?
Move it, what?
I don't know if it was your foot or if there was something squeaking I could hear in my headphones.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's good. Honestly, to be fully honest, when I was thinking about doing MKC, I talked about it for years. I mean, I think I even talked about it maybe to you.
Oh yeah, we talked about it
often, and it was one of those things you were one of those people who was inspirational of for example, the recycle yard. When you started that's a lot like starting Montana Knife Company, where it's I'm not really sure how to do this. I've never owned a knife company per se. I've never, a production company, or I've never owned a recycle yard, but I'm just going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And when I was sitting around thinking about MKC, you were definitely one of the people that was kind of inspiring and motivating of that attitude of well, I don't know, but I'll do something today, and then I'll do something again tomorrow, and I'll do it every day until I have something.
Right.
You know.
Well, it's an iterative process. Success is an iterative process. You have to keep doing it. The trick is you did it well. You fire small shots until you know where you're shooting, and then you bring out the cannon.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
You build it, over time.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. Where do you think that view on life or that attitude came from? I mean, was your dad or mom that way, or did you have a mentor?
That's a good question. My mom was an optimist, and I'm essentially an optimist. Mm-hmm. But I started in business. I mean, the first thing I ever sold were dinosaur teeth when I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went down by the creek and I took a screwdriver and pried the teeth out of cow skulls and then put them in a egg carton. And I carried them around town and I sold them to all of the kind-hearted old ladies who were home in the middle of the day as dinosaur teeth. And I'm sure they probably knew they weren't dinosaur teeth, but yeah. So I guess
you were a little businessman right from the start.
Kind of, yeah. So, yeah. But I also learned along the way. So the business that my brother and I started when I was in high school ended in 1973. And at that point, I was still in high school. We had 6 full-time salesmen who were operating in 5 states, and we were kicking ass. I mean,
really?
Yeah, we were.
So talk about like your childhood. Let's build into that.
Okay.
You were born here in Missoula?
Yeah. My parents moved to Missoula when I was a month old.
Okay.
So I'm a month shy of a native.
Yeah,
which isn't too much.
You and I are. I was born in Colorado Springs, but we moved here when I was 6 months old.
Oh, so we're pretty equal.
Yeah, I consider myself a native, but I guess in a court of law, maybe I'm not.
Yes. Yeah.
But my mom was 5th generation, so I feel like I'm grandfathered in.
Yeah, that's good.
So raised here, and then what did your parents do?
Well, my dad had all of his life had wanted to live in Montana. He grew up in the Depression. His father abandoned the family when he was in 8th grade, so he dropped out of school, went to work trying to basically support the family. He spent a summer in Montana with an uncle in Irata at the silver mines, and my uncle had a silver mine, or his uncle had a silver mine, and that changed his life to a large extent. I mean, he learned a lot of life lessons there. So his goal was always to come back to Montana.
Yeah.
So he started off building businesses, building them up and selling them. He was a blacksmith and a machinist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then eventually he was able to get to Montana.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff when you were a little kid? Like, how many siblings did you have?
I have 2 sisters in the middle and a brother on the older end of the spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're the baby?
I'm the baby, yes.
All right.
I'm the precious one. Yes.
What kind of things were you into as a kid?
Well, I had.
Besides swindling old ladies out of.
Well, I wasn't swindling them. No. So I had fireworks stands when I was younger, and I brought a little bit different. I had a unique advantage in fireworks because I was a current customer. I wasn't just some old guy who was trying to sell to kids. I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I looked at the things that bothered me, and I decided that would be my the way that I could fill the gap. So I ordered extra punks because kids were always mad because they never had punks. They were really cheap with punks, and they were incredibly cheap. And then I ordered a bunch of packages of 1 cent. They cost me 1 cent a piece of firecrackers. They were like 10 in a package. So those were the giveaways, the free giveaways. And then to top it all off, I told the kids, if you'll bring me real silver dollars and real silver coins, I'll give you extra fireworks.
Really?
Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, and I apologize for this, but I think many a father found his collection of silver coins in his dresser drawer disappear because of me.
Because of fireworks,
Yes,
yeah.
because of fireworks. But it worked well. It was fun. I had a great time doing it, yeah.
Yeah. Were you into any sports or any of that kind of stuff? Or
I've skied
outdoors?
since I was 6 years old, and that's pretty much the extent of it. My family wasn't a sports family. I feel sometimes like, there's huge gaps in my education, and one of those gaps is sports.
Yeah.
But there's only so much time in life. You can only do so many things. So.
I mean, I look at that with how busy my kids are with sports, and it creates gaps in other areas. I mean, it's just difficult. I mean, you just can't do everything.
You can't do everything.
Yeah.
No.
Kind of choose.
But it is fun to try.
It is fun to try. You do a good job of trying that.
Yeah.
So how did this business with your brother get started then that you were talking about? And how old were you?
I was a sophomore in high school. My brother, so I had just gotten back. When I was 14, I'd always wanted to go to Mexico. My brother, traveled quite a bit through Mexico. He was in college, and he decided, because of the politics of the time, and you can read into that what you want, that it would be a good idea to be out of country and in a seminary. So he decided to go to a seminary in Mexico City, and I thought it would be really fun if I could tag along.
Yeah.
So I convinced my parents, and when I was 14, that Christmas, we left in a 1960 MGA convertible and drove down to Mexico. I lived with a lady from Venezuela in a town for a couple of months, and then I moved in with a family for a couple of months, and I got my own apartment. My brother was 200 miles away in Mexico City going to school.
And you were 14. Mm-hmm. How did you meet these people? Just
when I got there.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. I was.
And your parents, because think about that today, just people generally. It's a little different time, but also not really. You're sending your kid to the Southern Hemisphere.
I talked to my mom about that, and she said, but your grandparents both immigrated. They were the oldest in the family, and they were that age.
Really?
Yeah. And when my mother was 15, her uncle bought her a rail pass, and she toured the United States visiting relatives by herself at 15, and she's female.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I was any more radical within my family's culture, but our culture is just different.
Right.
Yeah.
I always say that about I've always believed kids are capable of so much more than we as adults as a society tend to give them credit for. You look back in history, and at 14, 15, not long ago, they were going to war. Mm-hmm.
I volunteered with high school kids for 24 years, and I'll guarantee you that they're radically more intelligent and more perceptive than anyone gives them credit for. And they can also be stupid, but
but they're more intelligent today than any of us ever were. But that's how society should be.
Sure,
you better education. Just the access to the internet and what information. Period makes people naturally just.
And unfortunately, the other thing is that they haven't been given the experience. They don't have the resilience because they haven't been given the experience, because we're always trying to protect them. And see, my parents blessed me because they didn't try to protect me. They just let me go out and learn what the world was like. And that really did change me in a lot of ways, because what I learned in Mexico was that, there's rules and there's rules. But there's always a way to get something done.
Yeah. Did you go to school down there while you were there?
Yeah, I went to school. I traded a black and white TV set for the tuition for the year. We were in the import-export business, albeit without any certification long before other people were. No, we brought down we stopped and loaded the car with as much electronics as we could, because electronics at the time was very
It's still
popular.
that way. You still can take stuff down.
Yeah, to some extent.
We took just old phones that are, you go get a new phone and you throw it in the drawer.
Right.
You take it down to Mexico, and it's currency down there.
Yeah. So
they love that.
We had in the car, we had a friend of my dad's had a saw sharpening shop. And so he gave us about 100 pounds of Nicholson files that had been used by him to the point where he considered them dull, but to most people they wouldn't be. And so we took those down. My aunt had a clothing store, and she gave us some monstrous bras. I could have made a pup tent out of them. And she also gave us a bunch of orange and black and all kinds of fluorescent fishnet pantyhose, with a large, 2-inch square fishnet pantyhose that had gone out of style in the U.S. So if you think back to the 70s and pictures you've seen, those were the pantyhose. So we took those with us. When we got to Mexico, I learned how to do this finally. It took me a little while, but I'd go into the market, and I would find an older lady, a matron, and I would say, I need to sell this, but I don't know how. Can you help me? And I would hand her the bra, and it would pass through the marketplace, and people would leave and come back and leave and come back, and eventually money would come back, and she would hand it to me. And so she would take care of the entire transaction so that I wouldn't be embarrassed and the women wouldn't be embarrassed.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so it's a perfect.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, sure.
What other kind of things did you do down there while you were there? How long were you there?
I was in San Miguel for about 4 months, and then I moved to Mexico City. So when school was out, I went to Mexico City. Grant was in the only Protestant seminary in Central and South America, and I slept on his dorm room floor. So I explored Mexico City by getting up every morning, going out and finding something. There's so many different conveyances in Mexico City that you couldn't believe it. Anyway, I would ride a bus or whatever until 1 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, I would get out a map, figure out where I was and how to get home. My goal was to be home by 6, so I didn't miss dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any close calls with, Mexico kids, gangs, just people messing with the white kid from Montana?
There weren't really any gangs back then. The only close call I had, and I didn't realize it till later, was a gentleman who kept telling me how warm it was and how, we should really go back and take a shower in his apartment. And I didn't need a shower, so I didn't go. I was rather naive. But,
no doubt.
Yeah.
So how did you end up deciding, how did you guys decide to come home, or how did you get home?
Well, it was the end of school. It was the end of his session there, and so we came back, but we didn't quite come home right away. We stopped in Seguin, Texas. They had a short summer session, and my brother wanted to go to that, so I had a letter from the school in San Miguel that was intentionally vague as to my status as a student, so they let me into Southwest Texas State. So I had just turned 15. So at 15, I enrolled at Southwest Texas State.
In college?
Yeah. And I took Spanish, which, of course, I hadn't spoken, 6 months previously. But the interesting part was I got a 4 point, but I wound up tutoring native speakers because they didn't know grammar very well. And they certainly didn't know Castilian Spanish, the vosotros tense and the other part. So I wound up actually tutoring them, which is really fun.
So you learned Spanish pretty well while you were in that 6 months in Mexico?
I concentrated. I not only was on the street, but I was in school, and they were hammering grammar into me, and they hammered in the entire spectrum of,
Yeah, so by that time you were in college and tutoring natives. That's amazing.
It's kind of ironic, really.
How long did you stay in school in Texas?
It was short. It was, I think, 6 weeks, and then I came home, and it was time to go back to high school. And,
So wild.
So then we started a business. My brother and I started. My family has always traveled to Minneapolis because that's where our parents are from, grandparents. So we, go back and visit. 3M had a surplus center. It was always one absolute place that we had to go when we went there because they had so much cool stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things they had was a material that was the backing for the production of X-ray film.
Okay.
And it was a 10 mil clear polyester plastic, 52 inches wide, in varying lengths, but roughly 500 to 800 pound rolls. And they were just selling it, as junk. We bought a roll, took it back, played with it, and determined it would make fantastic storm windows.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we started, my dad built a machine to re-roll it. And my job, and I was a sophomore then, my job was to re-roll it, repackage it, ship it, and do all the accounting.
Okay.
And we started out with my brother going on the road selling and me, at home doing that. And then by the time I was a senior in high school, we were, like I said, we were covering multiple states, had multiple salespeople, and we were rocking. I mean,
And were you still buying as scrap?
Yeah, so
did they turn on to that and be like, what?
No, well, see, got to remember the timing. 1973, what happened? Two countries got the ire of the Arabic world.
Right.
It was the Netherlands and the U.S.
Okay.
And they decided to retaliate by embargoing oil.
Oh.
The Arab oil embargo in 1973, the year that I graduated from high school, was the year that 3M decided not to surplus that anymore.
Oh, really?
They would just reprocess it.
Oh, shit.
And so we were kind of out of business. We had about 6 months inventory.
Yeah.
And that's when we looked around and thought, well, what should we do next?
Yeah. So what'd you do with the business? Did you just shut it down or sell it, or?
No, we just shut it down.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
We
just kind of went away.
Yeah.
So what was next? Was that Axmen?
Well, it was Axmen at the same time I went to school. So I was sitting in high school, and they announced that the IRS had a person coming to speak to people about a scholarship opportunity.
Okay.
And I had never seen a person with horns and a forked tail before. So I thought, well, I really have to go see this guy,
Yeah.
And so I did, and I applied for the scholarship, and it was kind of a rotating scholarship. So the states would get it, each state would get it for 4 years, and they'd rotate it around through the Pacific Northwest. I actually got the scholarship.
Were you a pretty good student in high school? 4-point student or?
Yeah.
Yeah, good student.
I liked school.
Yeah.
I've always been really curious. I want to know how things work and why.
Yeah.
And so that lends itself to going to school and doing well. So.
Yeah, actually being interested in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the day I went to the district director's office, and he said, "Mr. Hanson," I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You're going to go to school in Helena." And I said, "Oh." And I thought, is there a school in Helena? Yeah, there is, Carroll College.
Yeah.
And he said, "And you're going to major in accounting." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And you're going to work for us, and you'll be a civil servant starting today." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And then you'll guarantee us that you'll stay with us for 3 years after you graduate." And I said, "Okay." So,
really?
So that was the beginning, yeah. So they paid for everything. 4 years of college at Carroll.
And that was the IRS
IRS, yeah.
scholarship, basically.
Yeah. So I became first a tax auditor and then a revenue agent. I went to every school they had, which was unbelievable. I mean, their education is second to none. So in the summers, I would
Carroll's?
IRS's.
Oh.
Yeah. So in the summer, I mean, Carroll was good too.
Yeah.
But in the summer, I would go to different schools, and then I would go on the road. One summer, they told me, "Guy, you depend too much on people around you. You need to get more independent. So here's 125 business, farm, and ranch tax returns, and you're going to go out and spend the summer up on the High Line. And here's the phone number if you need help."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you're just auditing farm businesses.
Farms, ranches, yeah. Eventually, toward the end of the time that I was there, I was the tax shelter specialist. So I was specializing in, silver straddles and litho tax shelters and all kinds of crazy stuff because it was just really fun. And this was the days before personal computers. So I had columnar pads that would literally cover this desk, tracking these straddles and stuff. It was really exciting, really fun.
So I understand it. Were you looking for places where farmers and those people were committing fraud, or were you trying to help them understand through the process and
I wasn't so much looking for fraud, but you have to look at the methodology in which we were evaluated. So, the thing that drives performance, the incentives drive performance, and what are the incentives? Mm-hmm. So they could not create an incentive where we were congratulated for having gotten more money, and they couldn't create an incentive where we were congratulated for giving away money. So they created an incentive where we were appreciated for having changed cases. And
Like in what way?
A change case means I get your tax return, I look at it, and I find something in it that isn't correct, and I fix it. Sometimes you get a refund, and sometimes it costs you money. Makes no difference to me which one it is.
I see.
So my goal really is looking at it and finding the right number. And the right number is virtually never the number that's on the return because there's always something that somebody makes a mistake on. If along the way I happen to uncover a lot of things that are unusual and odd, well, that's just more numbers and more changes. And I was starting to get too nervous about my job, and I was starting to develop an ulcer. One of my friends took me off to the side and said, "Guy, you don't understand. We don't get ulcers here. We give them."
What were you
looking at it
nervous about? What was like?
I think it was, what we call now imposter syndrome. I mean, here I am. I'm 17 years old. I've got long blonde hair over my shoulders. I'm going into Butte, and I'm auditing bars.
So you're only 17?
I was 17 when I started, yeah.
Was that like your freshman year of college?
Freshman year of college.
They immediately had you start.
Right. In fact, I issued a summons when I was not of legal age, and that created a little bit of a problem because they didn't, or subpoena, I should say, sorry.
Yeah.
Because they weren't sure that they could enforce it because I wasn't of legal age yet.
Can you imagine right now at this age with owning Axmen and having a 17-year-old walk in and tell you to open up your books and start going through
Exactly.
it, you would be like,
Yeah,
get
but-
the hell out of here, you snot-nosed little bastard.
And that's why I did well, because all my life I have loved nothing more than to be underestimated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I dress the way I do. It's why I drive what I drive. I want to be underestimated.
Right.
And then I can always,
Overperform.
I can always satisfy. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. That's what was it like? What was the direction like from the IRS back then? I mean, I think the IRS of those days, I mean, this is the 70s still, late 70s?
Yeah.
I mean, got to be quite a bit, obviously, night and day difference from back then to today, I would imagine.
In the 8 years that I was, or 7 years that I was there, it changed so dramatically. So when I came into the office in the beginning, 2/3 of the people in the office were CPAs. When I left, 2 people were.
Oh, wow.
And now I doubt you'll find a CPA in the office as a revenue agent or tax auditor, or it just changed quite a bit, pretty dramatically. When I went in, I could issue a summons by grabbing a form and filling it out and handing it to someone. That was the entire extent of the process. By the time I left, if I wanted to do the same thing, I would have to submit it to my supervisor. My supervisor would submit it to the lawyers. It would go on through a process. It would take 2.5 months before that could be issued, if it was even issued at all. So yeah, pretty dramatic difference.
Yeah, that's just in a few years back in the 70s.
That's just in 7 years, in the 70s,
Yeah.
So what it is like today, I really don't know.
No idea. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they've, in certain areas, have almost weaponized the office in places.
And I had simultaneously started the Axmen with my family. I wasn't, married or anything, so I didn't need to sleep or do anything else. So I just worked both jobs, And I got to the point I looked at it and I thought, gosh, to make it to retirement, the number of years that I would have to be in the IRS and the trend in which it's going, I don't want to do this.
Did you have a sense then, because now the IRS is a cuss word and, it's not what you want to see or talk about or hear coming, but back then, was it a similar feel? Like when you said, hey, I'm Guy from the IRS, were people like, oh my God?
Well, I would never say that. So when I'd go to a cocktail party or a dinner or something, they say, well, what do you do? I work for the government. Oh, really? What part of the government? The Treasury Department. Yeah. Oh, really? What part of the Treasury Department? And eventually they would winnow it down to, the IRS. So even then you didn't
want to,
When I started off, we could have business cards, but within a few years we were banned from having business cards because people had gotten those cards and misused them, and people had actually there was one...
defrauded.
Yeah, and there was one agent who actually got shot in a bar by presenting his business card.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a sudden moment of excitement. But, so, and, in today's world, I'm glad I'm not.
Yeah.
So my wife had a little bit of a struggle because I did get married during that period of time, and being a CPA and being a government employee and everything, she had a certain amount of pride in that. When I decided to quit and go back and become a pawnbroker full time, she thought that I'd gone downhill in social esteem, and in reality, it was moving up.
Yeah.
But it's all perspective.
That's funny. That's funny. Did you get your CPA degree then from Carroll?
Yeah, I did. Well, actually, I've sat for it in Macon, Georgia.
Oh, really?
So, I was at an IRS school in Atlanta, and the exam, I decided when I was, in my senior year, I decided that I was going to sit for the exam as early as possible and get it out of my hair. And about half of the class decided they would wait, take the summer off, recover, and then sit for the exam.
And forget everything?
Yeah, and most of them didn't ever take the exam, so I decided to get it out of the way right away. So I was at the closest event that I could take it at was in Macon, Georgia, and I was in Atlanta, so they let me off for 3 days to go down and take the exam, and I did. So
nice.
Yeah.
So when you quit the IRS, did you go straight into the Axmen then? Was that kind of pretty much?
I did. I was already there, in all honesty.
Right.
So IRS is really good to me. So the last 3 years after I had graduated from college, they positioned me in Missoula. So I was in the same town. And they also had flex time, so I'd get up early and go there. I'd get off about 3:00 and then go to the store, work till midnight. And
Did your dad start the store? How did the Axmen start, and why is it called the Axmen?
We kind of borrowed the name. We're good at that. So remember, we went to Minneapolis, St. Paul a lot to visit, and we were really enthralled with surplus and salvage. And there's a place that's still there called the Axmen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And we were impressed with it because they ran ads at the time back in the 70s, and all they used was their logo. So they didn't even use their name in the ad, and everyone knew who they were.
I'll be damned.
So we thought, if you can brand like that, and they had successfully done that, that would be really cool. And also the reality is nobody really cares what my name is.
Right.
And so to have a name that's a little bit unusual, a little bit different, will stick in people's mind.
Well, that branding, we are living that right now with that branding of, back when I named Montana Knife Company, what I did back when I was 19 years old, that name is it's memorable, it's strong.
That's right.
But Brandon, my business partner, he's really the brains behind the actual branding with the logos. And like he said, like no one knows what MKC is, but they will. Like,
You're right.
You're going to hammer that brand home. And your guys' logo is one, like you say, you can see that logo around and not even see the Axmen and know what it is. But everyone just knows around here what the Axmen is.
Yeah, well, it's been 51 years.
That's the thing. Between, and we'll get into it later, but between, all the trucks you've had running down the road, like you just, like Brandon said, it takes about 7 times for someone seeing a logo or a company before it registers, before they act on it. And so when you just naturally see all the trucks running around this and that, and pretty soon you just know what the Axmen is and you don't even know why.
Yeah, and the story of you and Brandon is really a perfect example of 2 really valuable skill sets that intersected and created something.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the smartest thing and I think there's an advantage also sometimes to starting things later in life where there's maybe less ego involved. And it was easy for me at that point in life when I started this to admit what I don't know.
Right.
Like I'm not, and I knew I would need a marketing person. And once I recognized his talents, it was like, you take care of that.
Yeah. And he recognized yours, and that's a successful.
Yeah, exactly. So, your dad, were you still in high school when he started Axmen? And what did it start as? It was 1973, the Arab oil embargo, right? The world had changed pretty dramatically. Our source of supply had dried up. My dad was tired of running a hardware store. I grew up in a hardware store in Ronan. Okay.
And my dad was tired of running a hardware store. So he also was in a position where, with my cousins and my uncle, who was his partner, he recognized that, you can't raise that many families in a hardware store in a small town like that. So he sold to my uncle, and we decided his non-compete agreement said he had to be, out of the area. So we looked at Missoula and we looked at Bozeman, and we flipped a coin and picked Missoula because it was a little bit closer.
Sure.
So really the 3 of us started together. He had the money. Well, we had some money from the other business too, but we took that seed money and started it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what did it start pretty much as?
We started off really as a secondhand store and a pawn shop, and we bought and sold tractors and farm equipment and things like that.
Was it at the location you're at now?
Yeah, same location.
Okay.
But the one fortuitous thing that happened is my dad in the hardware store had been selling Ashley wood stoves for a long time, and it wasn't a really big deal, but it was a product line that he knew and had access to. And Ashley was one of the very few wood stove companies in the United States at the time. And remember, Arab oil embargo. So So the nation turned to wood in rural areas.
Expensive.
Right. Yeah. So what really launched our business was what became later known as the hearth industry. So we predate almost all of the big names in the hearth industry by about 3 years.
Really?
And I have a lot of fun with that when I go to those conventions and rub it in, we saw it before they did.
Yeah. That's interesting. And what I'm trying to envision what it looked like for people that don't know. The Axmen is located, what is it, from Reserve Street, 4 or 5 miles? west of Missoula. And back then, I mean, today that's really considered Missoula.
Our earlier advertising said we're inconveniently but economically located west of the airport.
Yeah, because inconveniently back then would have meant like you were out of town.
Yeah, we were way out of town, but it was what we could afford at the time. So
Yeah, I can only imagine what you guys originally paid for that piece of property in that store.
$12,000.
Really?
For the land,
Yeah. It's and we're actually buying land less than a mile from you guys right now. So cool. We're not paying $12,000.
You dearly wish you could.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I wish it was in any kind of thousands and not in millions. So that's amazing because like the area. What maybe would have been around that back when you bought that?
I've got aerial photographs, and there was literally nothing. The only thing there at the time was the Artlight concrete block plant, which most people don't even remember.
No,
it was there, but we were pretty much the only ones in that Missoula Industrial Park in the beginning.
Yeah, because now it's surrounded by businesses and buildings in both directions. So you started once you quit the IRS, or kind of basically just let that go and ramped up what you did at the store. How did you guys break up duties between like your brother and your dad and you? And was your brother in it at that point?
Oh yeah,
all three of you were in it.
The first year or two, we had a partner, which was one of Grant's best friends from college. It didn't quite work out, and so he left. We bought him out, and he left. But so basically, I would do the accounting. I ran the gun department, and to a large extent the pawn shop. But we all did everything. There was no real division of duties. I'd be out there sandblasting a tractor and painting it. Whatever needed to be done.
Right. Which really, I think, feel like is still that way today. I mean, I see you around there doing kind of whatever needs done.
Well, yeah, I don't. I'll get completely filthy, and my employees kind of laugh at me, but
right.
I'm used to it. It doesn't really matter. You do whatever needs to be done.
How was it working with family all those years?
It was really good 99% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. We were, remember, we'd been in business before. I mean, my brother and I had been in business before. So,
right.
It's never going to be 100%.
Right. Right.
But,
you're humans.
But the ability to bounce things off of someone, get ideas, support each other emotionally when you needed it, that's huge. I mean, it's really hard to be in business by yourself. You really need at least a mentor,
right?
If nothing else.
Yeah. So as the Axmen started to grow, stoves, you mentioned guns. So you guys became, like when I moved to the Missoula area 20 years ago, you guys had guns in both locations. For people that don't know, you and I'm not sure when you guys started your south location, but you have a location just kind of south of Missoula, south edge of Missoula, and you've got this west location that's the kind of original spot. Then you had guns in both locations, and you guys were really known as, like, frankly, the big gun store around.
We did a few things that were different, and one of them was we brought Class 3 into the retail environment. So prior to that time, if you wanted a machine gun or a suppressor, or a destructive device, which are things that really go bang, then, there was really this obscure market where you could acquire them. But we brought them in and basically put them in front of people. So we put suppressors in a showcase, put machine guns in a showcase, and showed them to people. So it's a different way of marketing. We've always been different.
Yeah. And over time, did it just naturally occur that, because you guys have lots of farm stuff, right? I mean, for people, again, that don't know it, this is very local, but like the point is it's just such a cool store. But the fact that you can buy hog feed, straw bales, gates, fire suppression, like pump equipment for fighting wildland fires, I would always go up there when I was a custom maker and get supplies, little things here and there. I mean, you guys had, now you have hot tubs. I mean, it's just like this expanse of like things that none of them that seem to go together, but it works.
It's true, right. So one of the things that we have always done is every year, typically about, the early part of the year, we look at what we're doing and we try to decide what can we kill off. What's the 5% that we shouldn't be doing?
Yeah.
And we try to kill that off, and then we look at what the opportunities are around us and how can we reinvent ourselves. And you have to be, if you're going to survive in business for any length of time, you have to be constantly reinventing yourself. You never want to simply enjoy what you're doing and keep doing it, because then you'll become a Kodak.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's when people run right past you.
Right. So, we're constantly evolving. And we tried things, and not all of them worked. At one point, we sold log cabins.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that didn't work too well.
Like the Sears catalog back in the day.
Kind of like that, yeah. It was a great idea. We were ahead of the time, and we really didn't have all the logistics worked out.
Yeah.
And then we started a propane company, and to be honest, if I knew 5 years into that, if I knew at the beginning what I learned 5 years into it, I would have scared the crap out of me, and I would never have done it. But once
in
you
what
start,
way? I mean, because you guys started Axmen Propane, which ended up with, I don't know what size in the area you were, but you had to have been top 2, top 3 at least. I mean, there's 3 or 4 big propane dealers around, and you guys were one of the biggest, if not the biggest.
We grew pretty fast. We weren't the biggest. Cenex was the biggest, but we grew pretty fast. And but the intense need for capital.
Yeah.
And again, like you partnered with Brandon, the best thing we ever did is we partnered with Mike Sabota, who had run propane companies before, and he came in and basically picked us up out of the mud and helped us become what we were eventually until we sold.
Yeah.
And that was good. But Mike told us in the beginning, he said, it's going to be 15 years before you have any available cash.
Really?
Yeah. It'll be 15 years.
Just with the cost of having inventories of tanks and also gas, and because the pre-buy,
storage.
Like I've always wondered about that. Like, a pre-buy for propane, for example, you can do a summer pre-buy and buy all your gas for the winter, but that means you have to have it on stock. So like everyone who pre-buys it, you have to have some kind of maybe not on hand, but like you have to have the market at least guaranteed.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. So this is kind of unknown, but if you think about all of the propane companies and all of the infrastructure surrounding propane in the country, the fuel in our tanks and the entire industry's tanks is 2% of the reserves. 98% is in your tank, customers' tanks, right? So the amount of fuel that we can actually store at any given time is a tiny fraction of the demand and the need. So what's really important is that we have your tank full by the end of the summer, and that we have a consistent, logical way of delivering fuel to you. If we get behind the curve, if any propane company does not have their customers' tanks filled by the end of the summer, they enter a death spiral. And a death spiral is that you are so urgent to get fuel to all these people that are running out that you start delivering less than the full optimum amount, and you deviate from your optimum delivery pattern. So really, propane companies are logistics companies. They're freight companies, right? Yeah. And the efficient delivery of the product makes or breaks your profitability. Yeah. When you interrupt that because of issues, like running out of fuel,
right,
then you destroy the profitability of it. So,
as a big company, are you able to secure your price of your fuel through the winter? Like, because with the propane world, I mean, it's why when I built my house at the time, propane was through the roof, so I went electric heat. But I actually ran propane lines into my furnace room,
right?
Because there's also been times in history that propane was dirt cheap.
Right.
And it's such a fluctuating market that's so, I mean, the wrong thing goes wrong today, and the price of propane and oil and everything just blasts through the roof. So
yeah, you're absolutely true. So the best thing is what you did, which is what every real Montanan does. You have multiple sources of heat.
Yeah.
Because no one should rely on anything. And one of those sources of heat has to be something that'll work without electricity.
Yep. So. Yeah, and that's why, I mean, I have a wood stove in my house.
But to answer your question, we typically would try to lock in about 40% of the fuel on contracts. Never much more than that, because it's too risky, because you don't know what the market's going to do. Yeah. 9 out of 10 years, the market goes up in the winter, but 1 out of 10, it doesn't.
Yeah.
So to help that, we go to the customers and we say, we can guarantee you a price if you want to buy it now. And when they buy it now, then we buy a contract and set that contract up. And then we have the ability to draw that fuel.
Right. Yeah.
So it basically takes the risk off of both of our hands, which is a nice thing to do.
Do you guys still sell a lot of stoves? Yeah.
Yep.
The thing that really boggles my mind, and I don't know if you've seen a big surge, even really since COVID, but I mean, I think what COVID basically a fake emergency, really. I mean, obviously it was serious for some people, but worldwide it was
Only the ones that died.
yeah. But with I think what we saw in the last few years is how fragile our distribution system is, from grocery stores to supplies of any kind.
I hate to tell you this, but it's not getting better.
No. And that's what but I think people actually are waking up to that. They used to be called, or the name preppers used to be a real, like kind of derogatory comment, like that guy's a crazy person, he's a prepper. And man, I'm not sure exactly where the line between being prepared and just known as a guy like, oh, that guy, he's a prepared guy, and oh, he's a crazy person, he's a prepper. I actually don't hear of very many people anymore being made fun of for being a quote unquote prepper, because I think people have really recognized how fragile our whole economy and environment really is that's around us. It boggles my mind that people don't have wood heat in a northern climate. They don't have a wood stove. It absolutely boggles my mind. Have you seen a huge influx in people getting more prepared with buying wood stoves in the last couple of years? Or is it pretty consistent?
We're on the upward leg of a cycle. We've seen the cycle roughly 8 times, through my time, where, everyone would get complacent. They would have a lot of faith in other energy sources, and then eventually something would happen. But so 2 weeks ago, I was in San Antonio for the National Rural Electric Co-op Association big convention thing. And the topic on many people's minds, the NRECA is really concerned about the fact that we have a pattern of taking down base load power generation. In other words, gas and coal-fired power plants and hydroelectric. We have a ongoing process of taking those down, and then thinking that we're replacing that capacity with wind and solar. And it just doesn't work. Yeah. So when the cold snap hit here this year in Montana, Northwest Energy lost 14% of their production. If I think the number's right. I know it's very close, of wind, because there was no wind.
Yeah.
And in the Pacific Northwest, you can imagine how much solar is really dependable with winter storms and a lot of snow landing. So what you're seeing across the country is rolling blackouts, and they're becoming more and more common. And the powers that be are even warning people that this is going to be the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
You better prepare for it. That means that you really should have something that'll keep you warm without electricity.
Yeah, and my wife and I have been talking, kind of our expense for this year is very likely probably going to be a generator, like a pretty serious generator that runs off propane, because we have a lot of stored propane in the ground here just to heat this building and my other shop and house. Or we use propane in the house, but we don't heat with it. But to have a backup generator for a worst case scenario situation that's prolonged.
Right.
Anything that we tend to have around here, I mean, the worst windstorm that we had really in history some years ago when I was a lineman, a lot of Missoula lost power for up to a week. If that happened and it was 20 below, I, as a lineman, I reported to a lot of people's houses, came to a lot of people's houses, been out of power for 4 or 5, 6 hours, and they were getting cold.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
there's a reason that blackouts are 3 hours, typically rolling 3-hour intervals.
Yeah, because I mean, if those people were out of power for 3 or 4 days and 20 below, I mean, people's houses would be frozen.
Yeah.
Even well insulated homes.
So when we're talking to people about this grid fragility, we typically break it into 2 different, concepts. One is that I might lose power for a week,
right?
And the other is that the Teowaki, the end of the world as we know it, I might not have power for a couple of years. Right. So depending on which one you're focusing on, the answers are really quite different.
They are.
Yeah.
And that one of like, we might be without power for a year or 2, that's the backup generator where if you know that's if you know that that's the event that is hit, that you actually very sparingly use that generator only in cases of absolute need. But even then, you're going to burn through propane and B, probably out of your generation system. So you'd have to be really careful with where you use that.
Anyone that is off-grid is in the same situation as what we're talking about right now. They just don't have power and never will, right? Mm-hmm. So there isn't a person off-grid that ever has a propane generator because fuel consumption, engine life, all those things are completely wrong.
Right.
So they all run diesel. They run diesel because the engine life is significantly better. Mm-hmm. The fuel is much more dense, so energy density is pretty important. So when you save a gallon of diesel, you got 140,000 BTUs. You save a gallon of propane, you've only got 92.
How long does diesel store?
If it's properly treated, it stores for a long, long, long time. Mm-hmm. The reason that standby generators are almost never diesel is because the propane basically stores forever, and there's no maintenance on the appliance other than starting it every 6 months.
Right.
With diesel, you have there's a little bit more work to do, but the difference is huge. Now, here's the other mistake that almost everybody makes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get a big one.
Right.
Don't. Get the smallest thing that will do the job, that will run
the most efficient
under load most efficiently, and then back it up with a few batteries and an inverter so that you don't have it running all the time.
Right, right.
But the mistake with large diesel or propane generators, large diesel in particular, is that they blubber. If they're not running hot enough and hard enough, they don't do well.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And,
and for me, that's kind of when I looked at diesel and propane, and not that I've made a decision yet. In fact, I haven't put much effort into, we're nowhere near actually committing to it. But it's kind of one of those, do we then have to go put in a diesel storage tank, and how worried are we this, or is it the propane generator takes care of the 2-3 day outage, the 1 week outage,
and you already have the fuel supply. Yeah,
that's right.
So for most people, honestly, that's enough.
Right. The battery backup though is important. Maybe a little bit of solar. Mm-hmm. You guys, are you still in solar at all with the store?
Yeah, we do.
They sell solar panels.
Not as much as we used to, but
remember for a while you guys did a lot of solar hot water and solar panels and
quite a bit of it.
It's interesting though you say that with the wind, and again, one of the interesting facts about you is you're on the board, right, for Missoula Electric Co-op.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're very much in the know, more than most people with the electric grid and stuff. But with being a lineman, it's interesting the things you learn about how susceptible to rolling blackouts and how susceptible with relaying and stuff that substations are to tripping out, and wouldn't be hard for a bad actor to really cause some serious problems.
No. The other issue that's coming up, and it's becoming a real issue. Warren Buffett made the comment about 3 weeks ago that investors will no longer be investing in investor-owned utilities because the potential catastrophic liability of wildfires. Yes. And so what didn't used to be on anybody's minds is now a harsh reality that there's a huge existential risk to all of these power companies if they accidentally cause a fire.
So when I was a lineman still, that had really become, that year that I quit, or the year before, that really became a big deal because they had the huge fires in California and PG&E got their ass sued off. And the next summer, they started telling us that we may go out and actually start pulling cutouts. Basically it's a fuse on power lines in rural areas through the mountains, and just leaving people out of power during the hottest part of the day.
Right.
And it was all driven around the potential liability that if it started a fire, because like you said, they're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in lawsuits if they burn down, an entire town or kill a bunch of people. And so, it becomes this giant liability for power companies. And, we did all the maintenance that you can do, but let's face it, when you have thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles of power lines running through timber, and of course, they won't let you trim the trees out. You would have to have a right-of-way 200 feet wide to where no power line could ever. But then the next thing you know, a connection goes bad and the line burns down, falls on the ground, starts a fire. It's impossible to prevent all fire.
It is impossible. And so here we have the tail wagging the dog, because now we have to consider, do we take those reclosers, to one shot?
Right.
We can go out and set them all for one shot, in which case we will have power failures.
And you'll create a lot more power outages in a lot more extended amount of time.
Exactly. Or do we shut the system down completely?
Right.
And now the hard part that we all have to try to decide is what is the responsible, correct procedure and policy. So we monitor whether, we've mapped where we think we have the greatest fire risks. We've done everything we can to mitigate that. We've cleared brush, cleared trees. We test every pole. We've done everything we can. And yet, the Texas Panhandle fire was caused by a rotted pole.
Yeah.
So now the company who made the pole testing equipment as well as the utilities on the hook
Right.
for an untold amount of money. You just literally can't be perfect.
No, you can't. And for people that don't know, this is really inside baseball, but I mean, there's pole testing that happens, yearly, every single year on a rotation and a cycle, and there's human error involved in that. And there's changing conditions on the ground, just from runoff, ground can get soft and a pole can tip over. I mean, there's so much, but if the entire town of Seeley Lake burns up and 30 people die, it doesn't matter how much you've done to mitigate that scenario. You're going to get sued and you're going to lose. I mean,
yeah, and you're going to be out of business.
Yeah, and or you're going to, if you stay in business, and much like PG&E, they have the highest rates in the nation. Well, how are you going to pay for a lawsuit? The customers are going to pay for it.
Ultimately, they do.
Ultimately, you're going to have to raise rates to recoup money to pay.
We're a society that's really driven by the plaintiff's bar. I mean, I hate to say it, but in insurance, which I also am involved in.
So another thing that Guy's involved in is what board do you sit on?
Let's just say I sit on the board of the 5th largest property and casualty company in the country.
Okay, and you don't want to name it?
No.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But again, in this most interesting man in the world,
that's not me.
The guy who
I'm the most curious guy. Maybe,
stoves and farm gates and can rebuild guns and cars and owned a propane company and also worked for the IRS and by the way is on the electric board and an insurance board. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Insurance is so fascinating. I mean, I've been on the board now 21 years, and the evolution there is just amazing. And again, so many of the problems that we have are really not driven by weather. Most of the costs, not most, but a lot of the costs of insurance companies are really driven by regulatory risk. Regulatory risk is extremely high. When we look at our risk profile for the company, regulatory risk is always right at the top.
And what is that? What would be an example of regulatory risk?
Well, that's when the government changes the rules after the event. So after a hurricane, do they redefine what water damage is? Yes, they do quite frequently. Florida is a really good example of a disaster that happened, and it happened because of regulatory intervention to a large extent. So in Florida, the background, the legislature passed a law saying that if a insured recovered $1 or more from an insurance company, that they could collect attorney's fees. So all of a sudden, roofing companies now have 3 or 4 attorneys on staff, and the job of those attorneys is to sue the insurance companies. So they go out and they'll give you a $500 gift card to let you on the roof. You go up on the roof, you find some damage, which is almost impossible not to find. You contact the insurance company, tell them that it's their responsibility to replace the roof, and then you quote them a price that's rather obscene. If they don't comply, then you sue them. And if you get $1, so there were, I can think of cases where the customers offered $400. He refused it. They went to court, got $400 plus $444,000 in attorney's fees.
Yeah.
So how do you survive an environment like that?
Right. So everyone else that pays insurance pays for that.
Absolutely.
Pays for that cost.
And that's not the only issue in Florida, but that was one of the driving issues in Florida that made Florida untenable for most insurance companies.
Yeah.
So now everyone is flocking to the state-owned insurance company. They're doing the same thing in California. And now the concern is, are they financially solvent?
State-owned, so actually backed by the government?
Backed by the government.
I mean, isn't the government of California basically bankrupt? I mean,
Well.
they're in debt in a. Well, I mean,
Yeah, but I mean,
who knows what debt
but
even
who's
means these
who's
days?
counting?
Yeah.
yeah. But in Florida, Citizens Insurance is now the dominant writer. So they write more insurance in Florida than anyone else, and they're a state-owned insurance company. They don't really have, well, there's a lot of ways of looking at it.
So in the case of a giant event that insurance company gets hit hard, like are they going to be able to cover?
Well, they will because they have the option. So they will surcharge all of their customers.
Okay.
So if you're an insured by them and they lose $2 billion, they will bill you a portion of that.
Right. So there you go. Again, the customer, ultimately in the end, the customer is always going to end up paying for it.
Somehow that's pretty much true.
Yeah. You mean, it's amazing to me. The executives don't write a check out of their own personal bank account for that. It's
They
funny.
don't. No, they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Keep suing those people and see how it's going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
And I will say I am became a giant advocate of good insurance, and I learned some things through the process, and I frankly, just by pure luck and probably really thanks to a good agent, which was, at a different insurance company than you're at, but with Allstate Insurance, when my house burned down, you're standing there going, oh my God, I hope I have good insurance, but you don't know. And I would bet 99% of people would be there, stand there the same way as me of like, I really don't know what kind of insurance I have. I mean, I'm paying for it, but like, did you really read that policy when you bought your new home and you're all excited about your home? Did you actually spend time to sit down and like really read a policy and ask deep questions and little things like replacement value and contents and how that's what is your garage and is what's parked in your garage a part of it? And there's just lots of little things around that. Thankfully, I had good insurance, and Allstate was phenomenal. But
my best friend's house burned to the ground, and ironically, what saved his life and the life of his two grandkids was the 2 cases of 50 BMG ammo in his garage.
Why is that?
Well, because the garage caught on fire, and the ammo went off, and the sound of the 50 BMG ammo exploding woke him up because the alarms didn't penetrate through the insulation, so he didn't hear it in the house.
Oh my gosh!
So he made it out the back door, according to the security cameras, 12 seconds before the house flashed.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and everything. So one of the things that he discovered in the process was that he couldn't rebuild because he was in a floodplain. And the only way he could rebuild is if he elevated the entire property by 20 feet.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and the insurance covered that. His insurance covered that.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Those are the little surprises that
He all of a sudden lived on a hill.
Happens. Absolutely. And so, the value of an agent is really, none of us want to pay any more money than we have to. But we wouldn't go in for surgery without seeing the doctor first.
Right.
You shouldn't buy insurance without seeing an agent and talking to him.
Yeah.
And having a conversation.
Yeah, and
preferably a couple of agents. Don't pick any one company, but pick a couple and have conversations. But to buy it blind.
If 4 or 5 companies are all similar in price and one is way cheaper, you should really dig into why. There's probably a reason that most of the companies are within a certain range, and there's an outlier.
Find out who has the reputation for being the first one at a catastrophe to arrive and the last one to leave, and that's the company that you want.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say the company that I was at, the guy, what you end up finding is you don't work with your agent. The agent that sells you insurance, like,
he has no control.
You'll call and report it to him, and then you'll never hear from him again,
right.
Really. Unless he just wants to see how you're doing. But, they put me in touch with a national person, and that guy flew up here from Colorado just to take me to dinner and just to say, hey, it's going to be all right. Want to shake your hand so you know who you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. Here's some money to get you by for the next couple weeks, and, we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
But they made the effort and I was nobody. Absolutely nobody. But they went, I thought, actually right then and there above and beyond. And then from then on out, worked together over the next couple weeks, and then they wrote a check, and it was it honestly couldn't have been easier. Yeah. And so, there wasn't anything that was, and in fact, it was my fault, which again, I thought, oh my God, that's going to void my insurance. But he said,
we insure dumb and stupid.
That's what he said.
No offense to you.
Oh no, I'll take that. I wear that proudly. But like he said, I mean, that's what insurance is for. It's for accidents.
Absolutely.
You know, when you wreck your car, most of the time it's probably your own damn fault. You know, unless the wheel just flies off.
Yeah. Now, just so no one misinterprets that, it's not if you cause the accident intentionally. Right, it has to actually be an accident.
It has to be an accident.
You can't just light your house and burn it down.
Correct.
But,
yeah, no, they were phenomenal. But boy, I'll tell you what, in that first 24 hours, it's a scary thing.
Gut-wrenching.
When you realize, like, I really don't know what I have for insurance, you know.
Yeah, and, you know, most people don't, and that's okay if they have somebody trusted as an advisor.
Right.
But, yeah, that's important.
Yeah, for sure. So how did it come about that you guys became a museum? That the Axmen building and business, or I mean, I don't really know a lot about that, but how did you guys become a dedicated museum?
I think at some point in my family history, and I've gone...
Did you just get old enough they consider you a fossil?
No. No, I'm not quite that old yet. But anyway, at some point in my family history, I think we genetically commingled with magpies because we're attracted to shiny new things.
Yeah.
I've always been, in my family, my brother, we've always been attracted to cool, interesting things, and especially things with stories. So it isn't so much that we collect things because of the things. We collect them because of the story that's embedded within them. So if you came in and you asked me, which has never happened yet, but someday it will, what my favorite thing in the museum is, I'm going to take you over to a corner and I'm going to point up at something you would never believe in the first place would be my most important or my most impressive thing, and it's a pitchfork.
It's a what, pitchfork?
Pitchfork, right. A customer who I'd known for 40 years came in one day. He was a man of very few words. He came in one day and he handed me this pitchfork. And I said, "Oh, this is really cool. What is it?" He said, "Pitchfork." I said, "Well, yeah, I get that, Ewald, but I mean, really what? Tell me the story." He said, "Well," and he started telling me that his grandmother had emigrated from Russia. They were peasants. People were being killed all around them in the revolution. I don't know which revolution. But they had decided that they would go to this place where they heard that you could actually live a life and not be routinely and systematically exterminated by whoever came into power at the moment.
Yeah.
And so, knowing nothing, speaking only Russian, they immigrated to South Dakota. And she brought with her the pitchfork that her mother gave her. So now we're back 4 generations.
Wow.
And that pitchfork is, you can actually disassemble it, take it down and pack it. And she brought it with her. It was one of her most treasured possessions. And Ewald, of course, kept it and brought it into us so we could put it up. But imagine the courage it took for a peasant to leave everything they know and everyone they know and go to a foreign country where they really were only following a dream.
Right.
And that dream was that they could be self-sufficient, they could live a life, they could pursue liberty, they could enjoy,
And that pitchfork would also probably help provide a living. You could
Absolutely.
put that to use.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure that was the idea of, and you can use it as self-defense.
Oh yeah, you could. I didn't think of that, but yeah.
Well, if you're going to go on this unbelievable journey,
you're going to want,
and you may run into thieves, you might run into government agent, you might run, who knows what.
Yeah.
You now have a self-defense weapon that you can then turn around and use, get a job and use it to earn money.
It means so much to me because it defines, the American dream. It defines hope, optimism, but it also defines resilience and courage.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really cool. Because, I mean, and that statement's impressive because for those of us that have been in your store, there's a lot of impressive stuff in there. That's much more impressive than a pitchfork.
Much more.
There's planes in there. There's, cannons and lots of military, World War II, Vietnam era stuff, and lots of ancient history in there. A lot of Montana history.
One of the pieces that catches people's eye is a 1918 Pierce Arrow truck. And my brother, when he was, I think, about 15 years old, would ride his bicycle out to all the farmsteads around Ronan where he grew up, and he would volunteer to work for him and trade them something. And so they would let him go up in their attic and look around, and he came home with a Civil War era sword and a Civil War musket, other stuff. But the one thing that he always wanted was this one truck that was in this one farmyard. And eventually one day he was able to talk them into trading him. And he traded my mother's golf bag, her clubs, and a dozen golf balls for the truck.
Did she know?
No. My dad came out with him, and they towed it home. And all it needed was the shaft for the magneto had cracked. So my dad built one because he was a machinist. And we drove that truck every year in the parade in Ronan, the 4th of July parade. We'd put floats on the back of it. I mean, we never really knew what it was other than it was a really cool old truck.
Yeah.
But we did notice that the language plaque on the dash was in French. And it had a bracket on the dash that I was convinced in my youthful optimism was a machine gun bracket.
Yeah.
Right. So when we started the store, we took it up and put it in a pole barn and, put it up on blocks and left it. And about 20 years later, we went out, poured some gas in it, and it fired the first crank. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I did some research on it. And I discovered that it was made by Pierre Serrault for the French Army under contract for World War I, which is why it had French language plaques on it. The plaque by the on the driver's side on the frame says, "Caution, speeds exceeding 5 miles an hour, void the warranty." Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Pretty heavy duty truck, right?
Yeah.
There's another plaque on the dash that says that it's the property of the Bureau of Agriculture, Department of Roads. Well, at that time, roads were all under the Agriculture Department because what else would you need a road for?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it became basically a road department truck.
Does it make you also wonder how the hell it got to Ronan, Montana?
Yeah, I wondered that a lot. It was never sent to France because its completion date was a month after the armistice, so it was over, right?
Okay.
So it was sent to the Quartermaster Corps, and then eventually it somehow wound up in Montana. It still has original tires and wheels, solid rubber, of course. Everything on it is exactly the way we found it, except that we cleaned it up and painted it. Yeah.
The other cool thing you have hanging in there is a torpedo. Most people don't have torpedoes hanging around.
I kind of made that myself.
That's painted like a shark. It's pretty funny.
The other thing that's out in front that's pretty funny is in the recycle yard, this tracked vehicle came in, and I thought, wow, it looks like a little tank. It's really cute, So I had the guys put it on my truck, and I took it home, and I kept looking at it. And then I had bought, with a friend of mine, we had gone together and bought a semi-load of demilled recoilless rifles. So I had a ton of recoilless rifles. So I welded the barrel back on and put the mounts on it, and I made it into a tracked cannon, and I called it a tank destroyer, right? And they painted it olive drab, and then I bolted a whole bunch of military crap on it, took it out to the store. I still have people who will pull in off the road and say, I've been collecting military equipment all my life. I can't place that. I said, well, it's pretty obscure.
Yeah, it's pretty obscure for sure.
But it has a 106 millimeter cannon on it, so it looks real.
How did it become that you guys became an actual museum, though? Did the state approach you about that, or did you?
No, people had been coming in for years and years. And commenting that this place looks like a museum because we like stuff, and honestly, if you have cool stuff and cool stories and you don't share it, you're just not a good person. Mm-hmm. So sharing it was really the goal, and exposing people to all the thoughts and ideas that come along with it. We thought, well, could we become a museum? So I started doing the research. And I eventually got it set up. I did it all myself. Paperwork. I got it set up as a 501c3 exempt organization. And what it allowed is it preserves the ownership of that stuff so that it doesn't just disappear one day.
Sure.
If we pass away and the museum stops, that stuff has to either be it can be sold and money given to another nonprofit, or it can be transferred to another museum, but it doesn't go into somebody's back pocket.
Right.
So its preservation is a big part of it. And the other part of it is just that it's fun.
Yeah. It's cool that how often can you go shop for chicken feed in a museum?
Yeah. It's pretty
kinda
unusual.
cool. Yeah,
and you know, the joy
And
of
buy a gun
the
in a
joy of
museum.
running a nonprofit where you have absolutely no budget, no staff, no employees, and you're automatically open 5 days a week. You know,
Yeah.
it's so easy.
Yeah, no, it's super.
And for customers, if they want to donate something really cool because they don't have anywhere to put it or they don't have an interest in it, they can get a tax deduction for it because it is 501c3.
Right.
What I really like is it gives us an opportunity. So I can get a one-day liquor license in Montana for $5
Oh, really?
as an exempt organization.
Yeah.
And so we haven't been doing it since COVID. We need to get back to it. Put on a lot of barbecue events and contests and stuff. Each one of those was a fundraiser. 100% of the proceeds went to, either Habitat for Homes, the Watkins Children's Center, or whatever charity we picked.
Yeah.
So it's really
And
cool.
I want to get to that stuff in a minute, but the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, what was it? Dang it, I just lost it.
Yeah, you're
You,
seeing
oh well, with Axmen Recycle, how
Yeah.
I knew you when that kind of came along, but how did it come? Because you were always the guy climbing around on piles of steel down at Pacific Recycle in Missoula, you know, finding interesting things. Because it's amazing what people will throw away.
Yeah.
But how did it come that you decided to start your own recycle yard?
So the way I used to, everyone needs a carrot, right? And the way I used to motivate myself was we were, for the majority of the time the store was open, the store was open on Tuesday through Saturday. We're closed on Monday. So I would go on Monday and I would, do the number crunching, do all the paperwork and get caught up on that. And if I had done a good job, I would reward myself in the early afternoon by going to Pacific Recycling and wandering through their pile. And I was looking for stuff that I could save, that I could pull out of that stream and save it. And a lot of the stuff in the museum came from there. I'd take it home, sandblast it, clean it, paint it, put it back together, and take it to the museum. I love doing that. One day Pacific said, well, we can't let anyone in the yard anymore. And I said, well, can we make an exception?
Thanks to lawyers. Thanks to liability.
Exactly. Yeah. Is there any way that we can make an exception, or we can, can I come in at a special time or do something else? Because I really don't want to lose that potential. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we can't. So I just decided I needed to start my own company.
Yeah.
So that's why I started it.
Yeah, and it's amazing because it's just down the street from you guys. And when you say a recycle yard, this thing's massive. you drive in there and there's 100 cars piled up, and there's giant piles of steel and loaders and cranes, and it's really cool. But I can only imagine how that increased the amount of stuff that you actually got to see now that it's your yard, and it's frankly next door. And
the other thing is that
now you have people looking for you that work for you.
Absolutely. And so one of the things I'm the most proud of is I train people when they come in. There's two things you really have to master if you're going to work for me here in recycling. One is you got to have fun. You got to enjoy this. If you don't enjoy this, go get a job somewhere else.
Right.
And the second is you got to be curious. And every single day I remind them of what curious means. And curious means that you look at things and you look a little bit deeper and a little bit further. And if something strikes your attention, then you set it aside and have me look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine. What's the coolest thing that you've had come through your yard, or a couple things that would just that you're most excited about?
Man, I don't know how I can answer that. I guess I had, so one thing, and I just gave it to my best friend for Christmas, but I had there was this plaid red suitcase sitting there that someone had thrown off in the pile, and I picked it up. It was really heavy, and I decided to look inside and see what it was, so I opened it up, and it was a wire reel recorder. Do you remember wire recorders?
No, I
You're
think
too
I'm
young.
a little
You're too young.
for
Well, in the days before magnetic tape, boys and girls, they would record messages on a piece of wire. And so you had two spools like you do on a tape recorder, but they had a piece that they were with, the wire was the magnetic medium. So this was a complete unit, all the accessories, instructions and everything, but what really caught my eye was the label on the reel, and it was Eisenhower's speech.
No shit.
Someone had recorded Eisenhower's speech. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And that, not only is it really rare to find one anyway, but to find one complete and pristine condition with Eisenhower's speech inside,
that's insane.
it just rings the bell. Yeah.
God, makes you wonder who throws that off into the, like, do you not open that? Do you not go?
The reality is that a lot of people pass away and their kids don't understand. Maybe they don't have kids.
Right.
Maybe the kids don't understand. Maybe they can't take the time to come and look, and they've got to clean the house out. So they tell somebody to clean it out and haul it in. Yeah.
To me, what's so sad is the equipment that you see get thrown into recycle yards now, and it's the era we live in. It's a lot of that equipment has CNC and electronics and a lot of that stuff, efficiencies. I mean, the machines downstairs we have, far exceed what those other machines could do in capacity and manpower and everything. But you see machines like our friend John has that are massive bed lathes and massive mills and just these huge machines that were cast and that were incredibly heavily and incredibly huge in size. That there just really isn't a lot of people in today's world that have a place that they. I mean, we've all seen a lot of really cool stuff out there that, like, I would love that. I mean, I'd love to just have that sitting around here, but like where the building to put it, and frankly, the expense to even move it.
Yeah.
But to see that stuff also just cut up and destroyed, it's like, it's so sad, but then you're like, God, what do you do with it? Where does it go? And,
So I have a different philosophy on recycling than almost anybody around me in recycling. And my philosophy is, can we reuse it?
Yeah.
Can we keep other equipment running that otherwise would be scrapped because they were missing this one critical part?
Right.
Or do we just crush everything and melt it down? And
Right.
crushing everything, melting it down is not the most sound thing from an ecological basis or from a financial basis. So I spend a lot of time when each of those pieces of equipment come in, we spend a lot of time stripping them down, pulling out all the key components, and a big chunk of our income is I sell those on eBay.
Yeah.
And it's not just that I make money selling them on eBay, although that is nice, But the nice part is I know that somewhere I've kept a production line going.
Right.
I've kept a company in business producing because I was able to provide the part that nobody else had that wasn't available anymore.
Yeah, or you were just able to provide. You were the conduit to put a machine into someone else's hands that appreciates it the way you do.
I've actually sold Honeywell parts back to Honeywell so that they could supply production lines with things that they couldn't get.
Which is really cool about your recycle yard, because I mean that's not happening at Pacific or 99% play. I mean, they're a big corporation. Their jobs, steal in, steal out.
And I incent the customers too, because I tell them, if you will not cut it up and bring it into me intact, if you'll bring me the old farm equipment and not ruin it loading it, if you'll bring me stuff that is still usable, I'll pay you twice as much.
Right.
I'm happy to pay twice as much.
Right.
If they don't destroy it in the process of bringing it to me. And that's made a big difference as well. So now I have people actively out there looking for things once they know what we like and what we want and bringing it to us. And we're preserving history. It's good in every respect.
It is, yeah. So the last thing I wanted to cover was, and I actually don't know much about you. I just know, in conversations, you've spent a lot of time in South America and whatnot, in Central America, your nonprofit and your giving, what things have you been involved in? What have you done down there in helping other people? Because you're a guy that does a lot of helping of other people.
Well, I mentioned before, I spent 24 years volunteering with high school kids, because for me that was kind of a tumultuous time, and so I volunteer with them, and I can tell you some pretty funny stories about that later. But I've taken 8 groups to Mexico, Guatemala, different places to build homes. So what we do is we fundraise throughout the year to get enough money to buy the materials and supplies to build a house. And we've done some pretty innovative fundraising. One time we have an auction, and one time I volunteered that I would take 4 people. I would take them out to the recycling yard when we're closed. I would teach them how to run a 200,000-pound excavator. And they could pick up cars and stack them and play with them, like like you did as a kid with Matchbox cars. And then when they're done, we'll get out the machine guns and the short-barreled shotguns, and we'll blow the crap out of them. We'll have a lot of fun doing things that you've always wanted to do but never could. I mean, haven't you always wanted to really just see what would happen if you opened fire on a car? Yeah. It's a fantasy, right?
Yeah.
But you can do it safely, and all we're really doing is pre-masticating the scrap for the machines. And then we'll line them all up, and we'll shoot a bowling ball through them.
Yeah.
And so that raised about $3,000, and then there were people who wanted to do it, so I doubled it. So anyway, we did that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we get the materials, we get the group together, we go to Mexico, we build a house. And it's quite an experience, but it's wonderful we're doing that for a family. It does cost them nothing, and that's great. But the real beauty is what we do to the people we take with us. So we take this group of high school kids, and we take them to a completely alien environment. We expose them to the reality of life for the majority of people in the world, and we crack open their heart.
Right. Yeah.
We make them see and feel things that they would never see and feel if they were living here.
Right.
And that's why we do it.
Make them realize how special the
How
place
lucky
we
we
live
are.
is. Yeah.
Right. And then we have a lot of talk about, a lot of the assumptions that we have and the validity of those assumptions. And we have, we spend the nights talking, and you get to see into some really amazing conversations. One sticks in my mind. So I'm sitting at the dinner table, and there's probably 20 people around, and this guy is a pretty, well, I would call him an environmentalist, I guess, and he's ranting on how bad it is that there's garbage blowing around. And he said, why don't these people pick up their garbage? And I said, well, what would they do with it? He said, well, they'd put it in garbage cans. I said, and then what would happen?
Who's going to take it away?
Right. There's nobody to take it away. There's no infrastructure. There's nowhere to put it. And he's really upset because these people are so irresponsible that they're soiling Mother Earth. And I looked at him and I said, okay, so you would prefer that we collect all of this, cut a hole in Mother Earth's belly and bury it inside of her so you don't have to look at it.
Right.
Is that better?
Right.
See, you just have to look at things differently.
Yeah, and when I was down there, we know a native guy down there that took us around and saw garbage all over the desert, all over the place, and you quickly realize, that down there it's the government that's supposed to take that stuff away, but their system is broken, and no one shows up, and they don't have the ability or a place to take it, and the ability to get it there when they don't own a vehicle or a pickup, Not only that, but the government's also supposed to supply their tanks on their houses with fresh water, and somebody pays them off to not do it, and then they go around trying to sell them water, and they can't afford to buy water, so these people literally are without water at their own homes that the government is supposed to be providing, but that official was bought off by a cartel guy or some. It makes you realize that, like, we just take for granted our system around us that works so well.
That's the important point. And I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that I think garbage blowing around is good. I don't think it is.
Right.
But when a government has limited resources, is it better to spend those resources on sewer and water or on picking up garbage?
Right.
And I would argue maybe sewer and water trump garbage at that point.
Right. Well, and where we were at, they weren't really doing any of it.
No.
And that's why those people live in the conditions they do. And what I also found, though, is that some of those people were the happiest people I've been around. And
that's the conversation I have with the kids.
Yep.
How is it that these people are so incredibly generous and so incredibly happy, and they have so little?
Right.
What's different about them?
Well, but they really appreciate what they have and who they have around them.
They do. They live in the moment and see.
Right.
Western society in general lives in the future. It spends very little time in the present. And living in the present is a really powerful antidote for a lot of the anxiety that we have.
Right. Yeah. No, you mentioned the bowling ball for people that have seen my famous bowling ball cannon. The bowling ball cannon thing was born around here anyway. Was born from Guy. I had my first hammer in here, and Guy calls me one day, and he's like, "Hey, I've got this bowling ball cannon. We should shoot it and at your event." And I was like, "All right." And you had just built it, and brought it out, and I was like, well, let's maybe shoot it on like Monday before all the people are around in case this thing shatters, you know? And
you
so
man of little faith.
I'll never forget us out in my horse pasture, and you were, I think at first we put 1/4 pound of black powder in it, and we're like, the ball shoot out and it'll like roll across the field really fast, you know, or whatever. It'll launch out there and land in my field, and so we just put the barrel pointing straight out, no elevation to it. And we're like, we'll try 1/4 pound. And guy loads it up, and that cannon went off, and holy shit, that bowling ball was on a rope across my horse pasture and through the timber behind my place, crashes into a cottonwood. And I remember both of us like, holy shit.
So then we got cranked up a little bit more elevation. We went to 1/2 pound and fired it.
Yeah.
And do you remember, I've got this on video, and we're standing there, and someone says, where the hell are the geese? Because the sound a bowling ball makes going through the air as it spins and the holes catch the air is like 30 really angry geese.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was so cool. And I remember we were like, and because I remember us discussing, like, if we put a little more powder in, I think that'll go to the mountain. So then we turned it, because it's a public fishing access behind me, we turned it more back to the ranch that's next to us, because we're like, it's this time of year. He's probably not back on his ranch right now. You know, there's one guy back there once in a while. There's multiple people fishing and hiking dogs. We'll take a chance with the rancher. And I mean, sure enough, we launched that one, and we're like, I'm pretty sure that made it across the river. So then we upped it even more and aimed. Well,
we eventually got up to 1.5 pounds of black powder, and then with 1.5 pounds, and I remember because it was my wife's pink bowling ball, and it went over the mountain on the other side of the river, and we said, it also flipped the cannon.
It did.
Flipped this 1,800-pound cannon in the, upside down and
I think we were
across the field.
I think that's enough powder.
Let's go back to 1 pound.
Yeah.
I think. So 1 pound has been our standard.
It
load
has.
since
It's just
then,
the typical, typical load. Off the shelf. I mean, you can buy it off at Scheels, off the shelf.
So for those who don't know why we picked bowling balls, it's because they're all the same diameter. They vary in weight considerably, but they're all the same diameter because they have to go through the equipment at the bowling alley and get returned. And if you're ever going to build a cannon, start with the projectile, because you're only going to build the cannon once, but you're going to need that projectile time and time and time and time again. Yeah.
Well, and that cannon had a couple little design flaws with the way it wanted to flip over and stuff. You tend to learn things on your first. Yeah. I'm not sure we quite anticipated the energy that thing was going to be putting out. But the cannon that I got showed up at your store, which is the cool thing about your store. People just come driving in and they're like, I got this thing to sell.
I think they think in the back of their mind, who the hell would be crazy enough to buy this? Oh, I know.
Guy.
The Axmen.
Yeah, the Axmen.
Yeah.
So Guy called me and I was like, yes, I need that. So, and that one's actually phenomenal. I mean, it doesn't budge. It's that guy did a good job.
He did a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah. Change elevation and stuff. But the sketchiest thing of all was the mortar.
The mortar was,
Guy brought a bowling ball mortar out here, and so it shot a bowling ball.
For those of you who don't understand, mortars shoot vertically, and you get a little bit of a change in the point of impact by tilting the mortar. So a mortar or howitzer is really a short-barreled thing that shoots the ball up high in the air, and the idea is to go over walls and still be able to do things.
Yeah, and this barrel's maybe 2 feet long, and so we started launching the mortar out in my field, and
that's
again,
the scariest thing I've ever done.
Oh, 100%. I'm not sure how much powder we were using, maybe 1/4 pound.
Yeah, about 1/4 pound.
And we were launching those bowling ball, and we got a level out, and we made sure they were tipped towards the field, and then we started playing around with if we could land a bowling ball in my pond by my house.
Not a good idea.
I remember my ex-wife asking, "What if that hits the house?" And I was like, "Well, we'll put in a toilet with a skylight."
Yeah, we'll put a wood stove chimney through that hole.
Yeah. So the when it ended here was the I think it was a foam bowling ball. We didn't even really register to us, but it was a really super light, like kids ball.
Right.
And I think there was some wind up at high elevation that wasn't down on the ground.
Right. Yeah.
And we had it tipped to go out in the field, and the first ball we launched landed way out in my horse pasture, totally safe. And
it was
had 50 or 60 people standing around. And we launched that ball, and I knew right away something was wrong, because it always looks like it's straight up above your head at first. Well, this one I could tell was straight up above our head.
And then it started to come down.
Yeah, and then but what people do is they lose sight of it, and then they panic and they just run. And people are running, and that bowling ball came down actually a couple hundred feet in the wrong direction, just north of my fence line on my neighbor's property, down through his tree, and just barely missed their old cars over there.
Yeah.
And that was the time it was like,
I think we're done with the mortar.
I think we're done.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And what was really funny is
good times.
when we launched it, when we were trying to launch it into the pond right by my house.
Yeah.
The garage is 50 feet from there or 80 feet from there, and people would lose sight of it and run into the garage. And it's like, guys, that half-inch, 5/8 plywood on top of that
It's
roof
not going to save you.
No, you might as well stay out here and at least have a decent chance of seeing it and dodging it.
Right. But human nature is
That's
human
false
nature.
sense of security standing in that shop. But we had some good times with that. That was pretty cool.
And we shall again.
Yes, we shall. Well, cool. The other thing that I think is so cool is, like, when you go to your shop, I think it just defines who you are. The amount of projects, whether it's rebuilding a old coffee latte machine, or building a forge, or building a rolling mill, or working on a piece of farm equipment, rebuilding cars.
I'm making Gatling guns now.
Gatling guns, yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, I made a 22 one off of plans and everything, and then I wanted to scale it up. So I filed Form 1s, which is, for gun people would know, but it's the right to build a destructive device, and I started building them building one in 45 ACP, 12 gauge, and 40 millimeter grenade. And I definitely needed it for the 40 millimeter grenade one, but I decided to get a destructive device permit for the 12 gauge, because technically ATF could say it wasn't for sporting purposes. And if it wasn't for sporting purposes, then the caliber is too large, and it was a destructive device. So I thought, to be safe, I knew all this trouble. Well, I got stuck because I didn't have the math skills, I didn't have the engineering skills to scale up the plan, and the original plans are really complicated. So about 4 months ago, I decided that I really needed to get going on this, because, my horizon is not forever. And I already had the barrels, I already had the forms, I had everything ready, except I didn't have a good plan. So I bought a commercial Gatling gun that's currently made in 9 millimeter, and disassembled it, and discovered that they'd done a tremendous amount of engineering. So now I know how I'm going to approach this. So now I'm sourcing parts and pieces, and
That's amazing.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, the amount of guns you have laying around, and for people, it's like just parts everywhere, and I can pick up any little spring or any little part, and you're like, oh, that goes to that gun over there, or oh, that goes to here, or I'm trying to rebuild that. And
well, the beauty of my shop is I'm the only one in it.
Yeah,
and I have ADD. It's the magpie gene, right?
Yeah,
and so I have a few rules for life. One is that I don't let a day go by that I don't go out in my shop. I don't have to necessarily do anything. I just have to walk through it. And invariably, I'll find something that sparks my interest, my attention, and I'll spend some time and maybe the whole evening out there. But, I always go out there just to see what wants to talk to me.
Yeah.
And inevitably something does. The other rule for life is I never worry about something I can't change. If it's not actionable, I don't worry about it.
Sure. That's really cool. Lastly, what are you most proud of that you've done in your life?
My 3 kids.
Yeah.
I love them. I mean, I have one homegrown, 2 adopted kids, and I'm proud of all 3 of them.
Yeah.
I asked my dad that question as he was dying. He died of cancer. And when I was about 30 years old, and I asked him, Dad, what would you do differently in life? I want some advice, because, I was only 30 years old, and I didn't want to make any mistakes. And he looked at me and he said, not a damn thing. He said, I married the woman I loved, and I'm still married to her. Mm-hmm. I have 4 kids that I'm proud of. I'm proud of all of my kids. And I lived where I wanted to live. I said, what else is there?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, it was a good answer.
Yeah.
And I would give the same,
Yeah.
except it's 3 kids, not 4.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, thanks for coming out. It's been fun being your friend, and you've been an inspiration for sure, just in how you live life. And it's more about your outlook on life, and just how you approach problems and the unknown. It's very cool.
You've opened my eyes to so many things. I mean, by letting me come to the Hammer-ins, by letting me come early and meet a lot of your cohorts in the knife world, I mean, you did tremendous things for me. I remember one day when the guy turned and looked at me and he said, "Do you realize what you've learned in the last 3 hours took me 15 years to figure out?"
Yeah.
I'll never forget that because
Yeah.
it's really true.
Yeah.
So that's a gift that anybody can give,
Yeah.
a gift of lifting someone up.
Right.
And you did that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. It's been fun. We're going to have some more good times. So
We will. Yeah.
appreciate it, Guy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.